10x your service design offering with Smaply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smaply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smaply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of This Is HCD, where we explore the intersection of design and food systems with Lucy Flores, a seasoned design strategist whose expertise sheds light on how complexities of how we grow, distribute and experience food. Together we delve into innovative solutions and transformative ideas shaping the future of food, as well as usual a good dose of humour along the way. Lucy, was a fantastic episode and I know you're going to enjoy it. Let's jump straight in. Lucy, I'm delighted to speak with you. My good friend Rachel Dekas and future podcast talent scout, as I'm referring to Rachel on WhatsApp calls these days, has introduced us. But we'll start off, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do and where you're from.
Yes, so I'm from California originally, but I live in rural coastal Maine. And I am a design strategist that is dedicated to advancing equity in the food system.
Wow. Okay. So equity in the food system. You're at a dinner party. What do you mean by that?
It's a really good question that I get asked all the time. So the designer piece or equity in the food system piece?
The equity in the food system piece.
Yeah. So I'll talk about, I guess, the word equitable first. So when I think about making the world more equitable, I'm talking about a future where someone's group identity is not the primary predictor of their outcomes in life. So when I think about equity-driven design specifically, it's a practice and set of practices that recognizes a current time where we all start in different places. And so there's a need to intentionally adjust for those imbalances and disparities in order to address how people are impacted by both privilege and oppression. So in other words, it's recognizing the specific and unique circumstances and needs and desires of individuals, and then actually responding to those through design in order to work toward a more just future. Yeah.
Now I'm going to pull out a book. This is what my desk is like. We had this wonderful person a couple of weeks on, Leslie Ann Knoll.
Oh, Leslie Ann's so great. Yes.
So we've had Leslie on and
she's amazing.
Instantly became BFFs. As what's happening here as well. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade.
Yeah.
This is folks. But
Leslie Ann's so wonderful. I had the opportunity to work with her last year.
Oh, right. Okay. Excellent.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So equity came into that conversation quite a lot.
Yeah.
How do you define and understand where equity lies within the system?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think ultimately, well, there's a couple of thoughts I have. One is that it can be spoken to by folks who are impacted by the experiences, right? So it's one thing, I think that you might be able to take like an academic approach to this answer, right? And talk about statistics and talk about what you can see from a state or national or regional level perspective when thinking about the food system. But ultimately, it's in the experiences of folks who are closest to the work and most impacted by the work. The work can really vary in the food system because the food system means so many things, right? It means agriculture is considered there. So when we think about agriculture, we could think about impact on the environment and how that impacts different communities in different ways, right? There's labor topics that fall under that, as well as we think about treatment of labor and ethical and equitable experiences and opportunities. It then connects to immigration. So there are all of these questions and topics that come up within agriculture. And then on the other side, let's say if we're thinking about production of food, there's a lot that happens in between that. And then when a consumer is actually preparing and eating food that they buy at a grocery store or a corner store or a farmer's market. And there are issues on that end as well, right? Who has access to foods that are culturally relevant to who they are and what their communities traditionally eat. So that's kind of give you a big answer there,
No,
but ultimately
important.
it's about those who are experienced, right?
Yeah. My
By
framing was
different
off.
aspects of
I
food.
think my
Yeah.
framing was a bit off because like the food system, in my kind of naivety, I was looking at it from the perspective of, getting access to food like in schools or in whatever social situation you
Hmm.
might be in. But I guess if you look at the broader ecosystem of just food, you're going all the way back to the source.
Sure, yeah, and everything along that spectrum.
Yeah.
And I do actually a lot of design work in school food and food systems
Okay.
and in institutional food and summer meals. So I do a lot of food in and around food insecurity and hunger, which I guess isn't surprising for the reasons you just
Yeah.
mentioned. But there's so much within the system itself.
So walk me through, like I know from reading your bio and stuff, you've done an awful lot of work at Food Corp, uh,
Yeah,
way
yeah,
back, probably in the last 10 years, is it? Something
yeah.
around that time. But what does it look like from a design perspective? Because I think you were director of innovation when you were there. So maybe
Yes.
give us a scenario of how you're applying design in this space.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take us back a little bit to earlier in my career
Okay.
because to answer this
Yeah.
question. So I was passionate about issues related to food justice, and I started at this organization as it was being created. I was the first staff member, or rather, the first employee who was a non-founder at the organization, and so we were all learning how to build this thing that went from a $60,000 budget when I started to an over $20 million budget when I left. So a huge amount of growth for the organization, and I was always interested in the concept of design. I did not go to design school, I will add. And for anyone who's listening who can't get into this, I know, shocking. But I did feel insecure about it when I was
What?
younger, right? Because I thought you
Yeah.
had to go to design school. So I was interested in concepts of design, and I spent a lot of time and energy doing my own learning, taking online courses, reading books to better
Yep.
understand different types of design frameworks that you could apply to food. It did not occur to me immediately that developing services and programs within the nonprofit I worked at as being design, which is interesting because it is like when we think about the definition of design and what it means, that's absolutely what it is. But there was a disconnect for me between the idea of developing programs and services that nonprofits operate and this, frankly, what I thought was like really exciting, creativity based approach to problem solving that I saw as design. And so it took me a few years to realize these are very similar, and you can actually take some of these design frameworks and apply them to programs and services. And so when I do work with organizations now, of course, I speak to the fact that many people design, even if you don't have design in your title, and that these different approaches and frameworks and tools can be useful, again, even if you don't call yourself a designer.
Totally.
But what happened for me at that point when I was at Food Corps before I left the organization, I was there for 10 years, was I did become frustrated feeling like there was a lack of equity lens in a lot of the design frameworks I was seeing out there. So early on, I think the first sort of design organization I'd heard about, was IDEO. And so I grabbed some of their books and their resources and was really interested. And I felt like some of the practices that were in there were lacking an equity lens. So I set out to learn more about what else might be out there. And I was able to discover other designers and design educators who were talking about those issues, who had started developing some of those frameworks within the sort of design field.
Yeah.
Obviously, the practice of design has gone on for much, much longer than that. But that for me was really the starting point of thinking about and using and applying frameworks that bring that equity lens to the work within food.
Yeah. But moving on, like just looking at that scenario that you're spoken about there when you're at Food Corp, well, what does a typical project look like for you who is working in this space? The reason why I ask that is, say I'm working on a few projects at the moment and they're citizen based. So we're looking at society as a whole, a service that's accessed by everybody. Now, Ireland is going through a really an amazing space. And from my perspective, in terms of the future of Ireland, we've got lots of different perspectives, lots of nationalities coming into the country. And as a result, not every nationality and not every person in this city, in this country, are really doing very well, and they need additional support. When I look at the traditional approaches, and I'm doing air quotes for anyone who's not on YouTube, the air quotes of being not born here, who've got all of these additional privileges. How do you ensure, other than just looking at their nationalities and making an assumption, and this is a loaded question, I know, people, how do you make sure that what you're designing is equitable for people who are in the blind spot of design?
Well, two thoughts immediately jump to mind. One is that I think it's to work towards equitable. It's to work towards equity, knowing that is it's ongoing work, right? So there's not one goalpost that's going to be met. Two, it is involving folks who are most impacted in these cases, right? So it's, for me, I see myself more than a designer as a design facilitator. So it's taking co-design and participatory approaches where community members who are most impacted, whatever you're designing for, in this case, maybe you didn't say what the topic was that you might be working on, but whatever the project topic is, and bringing those folks, inviting those folks to an inclusive space and an inviting space where their perspectives and lived experiences are really welcomed and just as part of the conversation and the work as anything else that you're bringing to the table, and collaboratively identifying where the opportunities are, what needs to be considered in those conversations, and moving forward in that way. So I think that matters. The third thing I would add, though, is that this conversation around metrics comes up, right? Which is like, well, what does it mean to make something more equitable? Yeah. It's making sure that, again, folks who are most impacted by this work are also collaboratively determining what those metrics of success are. Yeah. Because if we are, people can take participatory approaches, but if you're still letting a funder who sits at a 10,000 foot view determine what the metrics of success are, you might be missing the mark, because those may or may not matter to folks who are most impacted by the work. So those are the three things that come to mind when I think about what the approach.
So in service design, which is my main kind of way of working, we would call that you design for the average and you test for the extremes. The average word is very triggering for me, because what is average? How do you define average and so forth? So and that kind of flippant kind of terminology of average is really weak in terms of being able to articulate, are you going to solve for average people? Is there such a thing as an average person? I don't know. But in the extremes, what we're talking about making sure that they're included. But how do you get to the point of knowing who needs to be included? It's almost a step before that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Relationship building is really foundational to this, and setting aside the common challenges in our work and in the way we operate, because it requires time, right? And we don't always have what is considered a luxury, right? The time to do that relationship building. But that foundational groundwork is essential when doing this, because especially if you are being brought in from the outside, right? If you are being invited into a community or into work as a facilitator, you need to build trust with folks you're working with, and then through those relationships, and that's with relationships with individuals, it's relationships with community-based organizations, right? Grassroots organizations. You can work collaboratively to identify who or what sort of entities would make the most sense to bring into this first step in conversation, right? Knowing that you can't have everybody involved in every single process. So having a discussion and to understand who might represent a particular organization, or what communities have not historically been involved in these conversations. So there's also a look back sort of at historical context to understand who's been involved and who hasn't. So it's not as like clear cut. It's not a checklist, which I know
Well,
there's
not
some
often.
people that love a checklist,
Yeah.
right? But it's sort of this squishy process that knowing that it's never going to be perfect, and also you're working towards inclusion in a meaningful way, like that's the
Yeah.
direction to head, and the relationship building is really, really key to
It's
that.
almost, well, it is a principle that you need to work towards,
Yes. Yeah.
knowing that the goal is not, a tick box exercise. It's in everything that we do, is what I'm hearing. But Leslie Ann Noel was talking about some of the frameworks that she's working on whilst in OCAD to make this more accessible to people. Now, I think that's really fantastic, because my approach to design and working with organizations is not atypical. It's more around cultivating and training and supporting them and doing the work with a view to slowly extracting myself from the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of the times, the organizations that I'm working with don't have a deep design discipline. They don't have access to people with 25 years design experience. So how do we ensure that, in absence of having an exclusive design team in there, that they can maintain that perspective and that framing to ensure that there's equity coming into the conversations in absence of designers being at the table?
That's such a good question. Well, I have so many thoughts on this. Okay. At first, I would say that we're all learning, right? Our education is ongoing, whether you're a designer or the manager of a food program, right? And so I think if there is a genuine desire to continue learning and building those equity design muscles, regardless of what you do, and we as partners in those collaborations continue to offer and support those, I think that's great. I also, I wouldn't make the assumption either that community members that are parts of those organizations don't have the equity mindset. They just might not necessarily they might not have the capacity or the time or the funding, right, to be able to implement some of those practices. So there are a lot of factors that influence how people are able to apply the equity design skills in their work. So I think those things need to be considered as well. So I can give an example. I'm wrapping up a project right now in Northern Florida, and I've been working with Second Harvest of the Big Bend, which is in the Florida Panhandle of the United States, with support from Share Strength No Kid Hungry, which is a national anti-hunger organization that focuses on kids and youth here in the United States. And without getting into all of the details of how summer meals operate in the United States, I can say that there are a lot of rules and regulations that the National Department of Agriculture and state departments have for operating what are called summer meals. And summer meals the Summer Meal Program is a program that offers kids and youth under age 18 free meals during the summer. And there's no questions asked. You don't have to apply for it. You could show up at any site around the country and get that free meal.
Yeah.
And it's gone through some evolution over the past several years. And there's an area, this is just background information. There's one area that has been trickier in terms of participation is in rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of the way the rules and regulations are set up for most of the summer meal programs, in particular in urban and suburban communities in the US. And it is more difficult for programs to operate in rural communities and make sure that access is available to people who might have to drive 45 minutes to get to a site, right? In a household where one or both parents or caregivers or guardians are working, and maybe the kid's at home all day in the summer. And so they aren't able to get 45 minutes to where they need to go. Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing that background up is because I have been working in collaboration with these partners to facilitate a participatory co-design process in Northern Florida, in Gulf County and Taylor County, to co-create some new rural meal distribution models for summer meals. And I facilitated a process where caregivers, so parents, grandparents, other caretakers that are either participants of the program already or potential participants of the program, were co-designing with program operators who know the ins and outs of
Yeah.
the, very complex rules and regulations that exist around both the meal programs, but also food safety, right? There's laws and there's a lot going on here that needs to be implemented. And we worked together to develop a bunch of new ideas, and there was tons of creativity in the room. It's inherently has a pretty strong equity lens because we are creating a space where a diversity of perspectives and experiences and backgrounds and lived experiences are coming together to talk about what works and what doesn't work, and what would make sense and what could be exciting, who know the details of those communities like nobody else could, and who also can bring in other perspectives. So to answer your question from about 5 minutes ago, what I'll get at is that a lot of community members are tight, right? And so maybe there's someone who is from a community within the county we're working in. They're the only one who joined us from among their neighbors. But they're able to say, hey, but my neighbor so-and-so, like this wouldn't work for them because I know that this is a situation with their car and what happens during the day, so they wouldn't be able to do that. Or I've heard from my neighbors that they don't even know this thing exists. Like, what if we got the word out through this particular community mechanism? Like the only way they're going to find out that this program exists is through this, social media platform or through this very analog approach to getting the word out locally in a community, right? Like that's not going to happen if you've got a bunch of designers who aren't from there in the room trying to answer these questions.
Yeah. I'm trying to think also like in terms of research, if you've got your segmentation pieces or whatever it is. I can hear my kids, both of them are outside. So just thinking in terms of segmentation pieces, you could probably identify who hasn't been involved from your user base. I hate that phrase, but generally speaking, like the people who have not been engaged. I think the bit that I keep on coming back to is research, and I'm as guilty as this as anyone else. We look at the behaviors, we look at the pieces that come through in our research, but I'm concerned that my own bias, my own white man European lens that I look through the world can be perpetuated. I can actually still have unintentional biases sitting in there that can actually do harm. And I know people listening will be like, well, get an inclusive team. It's really difficult when you're working in a country like this. And I'm not trying to give short answers, but sometimes I just don't have access to people who can bring a perspective at my fingertips. And anyone I know and anyone I've worked with regularly enough, no one wants to perpetuate those things. Everyone that I work with are really aware that we know there's something in the room and we know that we can do better, and our intentions are all there, and we're all well read and well practiced. And I guess I'm asking for the silver bullet in some way to make sure that we're doing as good a job as possible every single time. And what I'm hearing is, and tell me to stop talking, this is my turn to keep talking here. There's no silver bullet, and it's just living with the fact that we know that through time and through intention and through the right approaches, we will get to that point.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet. I think it's multifactorial in the end, right? I think we can all do the personal work to learn about, we all have biases, right? Like where do our biases show up? And having that awareness allows us, it puts us in a better position to interrupt potentially harmful decisions, right? Where our biases are informing those. So there's the personal work we can do with our own biases. There's the personal work we can do to learn about perspectives that we don't have based on our own lived experience. And that's ongoing for all of us. There is, and then there's different ways of, I think, engaging with more diverse teams that are reflective of the community members you're designing for and with. And it probably varies from project to project based on how much funding you have available. I'd say personally, and this also isn't helpful because I'm not going to set this up as in clear black and white, but I think there hits a point where, for me, I might say, like, I'm not the right person to be working on this, right? Or
Yeah,
like, we
that's
can't
true.
move forward. We can't move forward because we're not the right team as it exists right now. And when I say I'm setting this up in a way that's difficult, it's like, it's not like there's like 3 things that you can look for and say, well, those 3 things aren't checked off, so we can't move forward. It's very much a gut check based on informed experience, right?
Yeah.
Experience, and when you can make an informed decision like that. But there are things that you can look for to understand how you might want to move forward, or how you might be able to bring in different perspectives. Maybe, to your point, you aren't able to hire a full-time team member, but maybe you're able to take a different approach where it's like an advisory approach, or, where you are still able to meaningfully compensate other partners who can be in the room. Like, I'll share, for example, I worked on a project a few years ago that was focused on diet culture here in America. And I was working with youth, primarily ages 14 through 18 or so.
Yeah.
And we were having conversations around cultural foodways. And I knew that there was a good chance that we were going to touch on topics that are beyond my area of expertise in terms of sort of care and responsibility and ethics, right? So things like disordered eating as an example. And so I prioritized hiring an advisory team who supported me in the design research phase, in terms of recruitment, in terms of interview questions and how to frame questions and topics, and then set me up to basically do role playing around, like, it's very likely, if you talk to enough teens, somebody's going to disclose something about their experience.
Yeah.
You are not a mental health professional. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't work on the project, but here are the things from an ethical perspective that you can and should do to make sure that you're showing up in a responsible way for teens. And so we did role playing around what happens if, somebody brings up a topic. We put together a list of resources that we made available to participants if it was triggering something internally with them. You get off the phone or leave an interview, and it doesn't just end there for some people, right?
No, yeah.
They're still feeling what they're feeling, and that experience is there. So how can we set up those folks to leave the conversation and get what they need? Yeah, exactly. So in that case, it was an advisory team. It wasn't a full set of folks who was involved in the entire design process, but to me, that was a priority investment. And frankly, I would not have done the project if I couldn't have had that support, because it wouldn't have been an ethical approach.
But you wouldn't have felt supported, I guess, and ethically, as you say, like, being able to stand over the work, saying, well, actually what I'm doing is making the system better. And I love that approach as well. Going back to the support piece there, like, one of the pieces I was talking to you before was that I'm working on is homelessness and access to social housing and so forth. And I was actually I was coaching this morning, and I ran through some role plays trying to encourage people to be able to facilitate a very atypical or very standard kind of research session. And I say that in terms of, like, how was your holiday kind of scenario. It wasn't, it was just getting to the basics of research. And I explained to them that, like, when you're researching in the space that ultimately I end up being in day out, there's trauma on the floor, all over the floor, when people are looking for these kind of social, benefits to access housing. And that stuff, like, I've had conversations in the last couple of weeks, and I have a psychologist that I engage with once a month to, as I say, to release, just to, like, talk about this stuff. And it's really important to call that out when you're training, because if people believe that, oh, well, I can just go and do some conversations and stuff, not only are you at risk of harming yourself, you are also at harming the person that you're researching by asking those questions. And that is the deciding point for me, why I'm like, okay, if you're setting up functions that we're talking about here, the systems of care that surround that are as important as the research itself. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's taken me 20 odd years to realize that.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful for people like our mutual friend Rachel Dekas,
She's not my friend, to be honest. I'm only joking. Rachel's like, what?
The worst. No, I'm kidding. We love you, Rachel.
Yeah, a joke. It was just a small joke. Okay, please don't get angry. Okay, continue.
And truly, though, right? Like this, she speaks to how important it is to have those care professionals, whether they're social workers. I know the terms are different in different countries for what that looks like, and the fact that we don't. There's so much pressure to meet deadlines and timelines.
That's right.
Which is, I think, paired with the fact that doing some of this work isn't valued. It is therefore not built into timelines.
Yeah.
So what often happens is you maybe have one or two team members that are trying to integrate some of these practices into the work, and it just reinforces the cycle, which is like, we don't have time, it's therefore not a priority, and then we therefore do not build it into the timelines. But creating capacity in the budget and building out the time to bring in consultants or other team members or advisors in areas where it is going to help you bring a stronger framework of care and to bring in the tools that are necessary is, to your point, going to serve the project. It's going to support you as the facilitator, and most importantly, it's going to ensure that the space is sort of as careful as possible for participants who are sharing oftentimes, their emotional labor and some of the topics that we're working on, right?
Yeah.
I'm in most of my projects, while food can be very joyful in a lot of ways, it's a huge stressor in tons of ways as well. And so if we're talking about designing like a coffee mug, I'm not as worried, right, about some of these topics. But if we're talking about having access to groceries when you're going into debt to pay for your groceries, which is what, like 60% of the American population right now is paying into savings to pay for groceries. It's a different, there's a different level of care that's
in that situation. It's just, I know we were talking beforehand, but like, how can we live in a society that's so unjust where, people are getting themselves into debt to eat? Do you know what I mean? And most likely the food that they're eating is probably not the best food. It's the cheapest.
Yeah, and best defined in different ways, right? Like food is like, I always think about food as being nourishment, which includes nutrition, right? Like food offers nutrition, which is really important for us to survive and be in good health, and also food that is culturally relevant and appropriate to the communities that are eating those foods, having access to their cultural foods that connect them to history, food that's good for the land, right? That is sustainable and that is supporting sustainable food production practices. There's so much that comes with what we are able to buy, what we have access to buy and to make for ourselves.
So the whole space is just like, again, I've been doing this podcast for coming up to 8 years, which is ridiculous. But every time I'm speaking to people, the more I kind of go, wow, there's an area of design that I haven't really given too much thought for. I haven't not had anything other than just being unaware of it. How did you manage to find this world of equity in food? Like, what was your background to getting into this space?
Yeah, it's real niche. I, as I mentioned earlier, I was working in the school food space specifically here in the US at this national nonprofit I was at called Food Corps. I was really interested in design frameworks, and also at the time felt really strongly that I wanted to figure out how to bring stronger equity lens to those frameworks. And then those things came together. And it's interesting because sometimes people will ask, they'll say, isn't it too niche? To which I respond, the food system, the food industry is enormous, right? Both in terms of the size, it reach, because everybody eats, and the number of people that are part of the system as growers and producers and distributors and chefs and consumers. Like it's huge. And, the size of the industry is, when you think about even like how money moves within it, right? In terms of exports and imports, and school food alone, right, is its own industry. It's or field. There's so much there, and so I was really excited when I started the studio to focus on food. I think that there's a lot of these frameworks and tools and approaches, right? These mindsets and practices can maybe be applied in any field. And there are some things that are unique to food in terms of how we experience it. The biases that show up within food run really deep because food is so personal.
Absolutely.
It's not just something that we, think about from time to time. It's something that we engage with every day, multiple times a day, that is about culture and history and land and water and community. It's all of these things. And so when something is that personal, it is bound to bring up a lot for folks.
Yeah.
So I feel, and I love talking about food. I love eating. I love all things food. So there, the other piece of it is just that I'm really passionate about it, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It doesn't come across when you're speaking about food. I'm joking, of course. So looking at systems that you have in place in America at the moment, I can imagine it's probably not in the greatest shape at the moment, based on the way everything is playing out. And without going into the drama that's happening in the US at the moment, maybe you can reflect on other territories in the world who have an equitable system that we can look at and talk about. Is there anywhere in the world where you see these systems working in closer to unison than what we're talking about here, and they're equitable and they're in harmony?
Yeah. I'm going to bring us back to the US, because I think what's interesting to think about is, especially if you're less familiar with food and the way sort of food systems work, is that you could talk about the US food system as a whole, and food is also inherently local and regional in a lot of ways as well, right? In terms of where food grows, how it's distributed, where it's distributed, all of those things. And I think they're really exciting, wonderful examples of equitable parts of the food system that are actually in existence here in the United States, that are taking place at a local level and a regional level. So if you take that, go up to a 10,000-foot view, you might say like, whoa, there's some rough stuff going on here that is inherently inequitable and that just isn't working, right? The system was designed a certain way and it's not working for most people. And then you can see examples of work taking place locally and regionally, where there's really wonderful collaboration going on between local producers, where there are systems of support for, let's say, farmers, for example, who have been historically marginalized, who are getting opportunities to invest in their practice and their work in ways that maybe they weren't able to previously because of those local support systems. Examples of like here in the state of Maine, where I live, it's one of the states in our country where we offer universal school meals to kids, so that free meals at lunch are available to everybody across the board, across the state, and not every state has that right now. So there are these examples of where it's taking place, whether it is in production, whether it's in values aligned sourcing and procurement, meaning there are institutions that are not just looking at cost, they're looking at the externalized costs as well, and whether that food was produced ethically, and that labor is treated fairly in that production, and that it was, sustainably produced, all of these things, that these other values that we can consider when we're making food choices. There are institutions that are prioritizing values-aligned procurement practices in their work. So I just want to share that example, because there is great stuff going on here too.
In America, okay. In the US.
Yes. And there is ample opportunity to grow that, to replicate, what's working in certain places at a broader scale. There are no doubt barriers to doing that. And we can see when it's being done in a way that's sort of profoundly impactful to everyone who's involved, from producer to consumer.
So looking at, if there are, there are some things that are working, obviously.
Yeah.
It is a system at the end of the day. Some things are working, some things are not, some things are, less adaptive than others. I'd like to like have a discussion around other territories. Like, is there anywhere that you see, like maybe the Netherlands or Denmark or Sweden? Like, have you any exposure to territories that you can look at and refer to for where it's working well, where there's equity at play?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not as familiar with I wouldn't be able to get into the sort of policies that are enabling certain types of practices, for example, in other countries. So I wouldn't want to speak to something that isn't in my area of knowledge or expertise.
But if there's people out there who are listening and saying, well, actually, I've got some stuff, please, when this goes out on LinkedIn, connect with me and Lucy, like, chime in. Like, this is a discussion. Like, we're talking about what's working, what's not working, the ways that we can improve as practitioners to help improve better social outcomes through the use of design. So if you do have anything out there that you want to share, connect with us both on LinkedIn and, join in the conversation.
Love that. Yes.
Really powerful. Lucy, we are coming towards the end of this episode. I know I need to get my sound effects like wow, 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 wow.
Oh, I thought there was going to be like a party horn.
Do I have like, well, this should be played for all my jokes.
Oh, you do have sound effects.
Yeah. So do I have, let me see, like, I don't think I do.
Do you have a party horn? The club horn?
Do I have a party horn? I've got, there we go. That's the one. It's the end of the episode. Maybe I'll start putting that one in place. Like, yes, that's right. Oh yeah, DJ Gerry in the house.
I like that too. Yeah, you've got to kick this thing up to the next level.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So, Lucy, we've got your website here. Like we know Studio Magic Hour is the name of your practice, which you're running at the moment. Well, what is the website URL for that? Is it
StudioMagicHour.com?
Okay.
Yep.
And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn as well. So obviously, if you want to continue the conversation and, message Lucy, definitely, I'm sure you're interested in that.
Yeah.
If there's anything else, any other places you want to point people to that you might be of interest for the listeners?
Those are the spots. That's where I hang out.
I've done it. Yeah. Well, Lucy, anytime that you want to come back on the show, talk to us about what you're working on, you are always welcome to come back, because it's been an absolute joy speaking to you and just learning about going inside your mind and your work and your amazing work as well. So keep up the amazing work, and thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. This is great.